Welcome to the ECR Retail Loss, Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. Discounting food before its expiry date, often called the process of marking down, is critical to reducing food waste. In this podcast, I'm joined by Richard Thaleman, the food waste advisor to ECR Retail Loss, and we explore the presentations and new insights from retailers on a recent meeting where we looked at how to position the markdowns. Is it a value proposition or a sustainability proposition? We looked at the placement in the stores of these items that are being discounted in the aisle or in a separate location. We talked also about the use of electronic shelf edge labels and then the data itself from the markdowns and how that might impact and inform future buying decisions. For example, if you know that only 60% of an item sold at full price, does that mean that you probably should look at discontinuing that item or changing the retail price? A couple of weeks ago, we had a really well-attended working group meeting on the food and waste group, or food surplus and markdown group, however we might want to call it these days. And we had 81 people attending, and our focus was on markdowns and the discounting before the product runs out. And so we were looking at, who's doing something new and different in this space. And we had started off with a paper from Professor Akas from the University of Massachusetts, and she did some work around the positioning. She identified that many retailers were hesitant, especially in America, to do markdowns because of concerns around their brand equity and brand reputation. Would they lose the sort of sense that they were a fresh retailer? And then we had a retailer share their journey on moving from a markdown strategy that was, perhaps more static, perhaps less visible, not generating huge amounts of data, to a new, more dynamic markdown process. And then we had reactions to both those presentations from the retailers. And a jolly good time was had by all. But more importantly, Richard, as the food waste expert advisor to the ECR Retail Loss Group, what were your takeaways and your sort of thoughts around what should retailers make of this particular session? What should they take away and think about?
Yeah, so I think it was a very interesting session all round. I think if we start with the paper from Professor Akas, is that looking at consumer communications as well was very interesting. And you're right to say that in some of the markets and in some of the bigger markets, they're reluctant to even do reductions because of that brand perception. So I think the findings in that paper that suggested when you're talking about the environmental impact and that they're helping to save waste and save the planet in whichever way that you put it, just puts them in a slightly different light than sort of a brand or their perception of a brand damaging discount that may look like they've got a flood of labels and don't want that to be what people see when they walk in their store. Of course, when you look at here in the UK and other markets where we've always done it, we're used to seeing that. So I suppose there's another side to that in looking at how can we communicate that better to try and capture more people that want to buy reductions, in the UK, for example, where everybody's used to seeing reduced to clear labels and understand what it is.
And the constant debate, isn't it, about where does it go? Is it a separate section or is it in the aisle? That seems to be unresolved.
And I think you're right, and I think that really comes into it. And of course, some of that is dictated to by the size of the store, because some people don't have a dedicated space, so therefore they have to keep it in aisle. Other people keep it in aisle and then move it to a dedicated space. But something else that I experienced in my time in retail was that we were sort of looking into the type of customer that were buying that. And one of the things that I found interesting in a couple of shops was that lots of people going in to get a bargain at that time when they know all of the reductions are going to be out, whether it's at 7 o'clock. But what they were actually buying was sort of lower priced items. It didn't really matter what it was, but it generally tended to be bread, fruit and veg that was always below 50p. But then when it came to a £5 pizza that might have had a huge discount and it was now £2, they weren't interested. So really all they were doing was hunting out the really cheap stuff that they could continue to make food with for the rest of the week. So I think there is a lot more work to do here on location, communication, the way that you phrase, how you're trying to sell that and for what purpose. And there are different customers for different products in stores as well.
Good thoughts.
So I think through that customer comms, I think we see that now that lots of shops are changing the wording around what they put up above their reduced to clear sections to try and encourage more people to buy that, because of course there's lots of food that actually is perfectly good quality for another couple of days, or even a few days and even weeks when you're talking about produce. So I think it's really key to keep on this topic, and I think the retailers should take away that I don't think now in this sort of time in our life that people are too worried about it being a reduced clear item. There are far more people, I think, probably even from the turn of the discounters in the UK, when you used to see Range Rovers turning up in an Aldi. I think that kind of changed everybody's perception of cheaper food. People are always looking for good quality and cheaper food.
Yeah, very good. Very good. What about the retailer that presented their journey on dynamic markdowns? What were your takeaways from that presentation?
I think now there's lots of good innovation on sort of dynamic markdown and algorithms to make the most profit and the best time to reduce it, on specific products. And I think moving away from that static reduction, I know in my time in retail that there was a lot of debate about, even moving a reduction from 1p, when the economies of scale, it's millions of pounds loss. So when you're doing a static reduction every day at certain times of day and then another static reduction later in the day, of course it's not the most profitable way to go about it. So I think the presentation we had there is just goes to show that how much of a difference in sell through profitability you can make by sort of bringing on board an algorithm and dynamic markdowns in the stores. And actually, in some instances, some people are buying, if they're buying it earlier in the day and it's a lower markdown, they're still doing it because they know that they're going to use it that day. So therefore, a smaller markdown is making you more profit, and actually they're still getting a bargain because they were going to buy that product that day anyway.
Right. Okay.
But I think there's a huge, or a fine balance, really, not a huge balance. There's a fine balance, especially when we look at things like people of a more sustainable way of looking at this problem in retail, is that when you've got dynamic markdowns and you look at how much you need to mark down to get that to sell through and to be more profitable, sometimes it means being more profitable is selling some of those products at a certain price, which makes you more profitable, which might end up as an end result being that you've got a few more items left at the end of the day. And of course, that could fly in the face a little bit of the Courtauld commitment in reducing the amount of food waste you have, because of course it's measured by weight. But the solution to that is that you make the most profit from that. You just tweak it until you get a fine balance, the one that you want, and that that the rest of it, as long as you can then donate that to charities and get it into humans or animal feed, that you are delivering on both. But first and foremost, as a business, as a retailer, you want to make profit. So you've got to make that decision. And I think from the presentation we had, it was more about let's get rid of all of the products, through that dynamic markdown, but perhaps tweaking it maybe a little bit further so that they can get rid of it. But you might then start to sort of backpedal a little bit and then just tweak it to the point where you've got it absolutely right.
Yeah. Now, just for those outside the UK, what's the Courtauld agreement?
So Courtauld agreement is driven from Champions 12.3, where it's a commitment to reducing food waste by 50% by 2030, which in some way, shape or form, most people are trying to do, whether they are signed up to that kind of commitment or not. It's a profitability problem as much as an environmental problem. So you would want to get after that.
Is that UK only, or is it across Europe or the world?
No, it's across. Yeah, it's across Europe. So yeah, lots of people signed up to that through RAP, the organisation. But even outside of that, there's no reason why you can't start to work towards those things with all of the same principles and onboarding things like dynamic markdowns, which will help you get there.
Yeah. I liked the piece that was mentioned in the presentation around using the data on markdowns to drive assortment decisions or difficult conversations with the buyer around what percentage was sold at full price and what was percentage sold at discount. What are your sort of take on that?
Yeah, I think that is right in many cases. The more data you can have that informs you on what you do with that, and when you look at buyers making some decisions on discontinuing products, having that kind of information to hand is really beneficial in then making the right decisions on what customers want. And it might even end up being that the feedback is to a supplier that their products sell far more at a lower price. Who knows, they might even reconsider the retail selling value, so that they could make a decision on that as well as or before they become discontinued or delisted in a number of shops.
Yeah, no, good point. What else do you pick up?
So one of the things really, I suppose, that I always look at, and it kind of pulls all these things together, is that when you look at the hierarchy of selling products at full price, then through markdowns, and then now through redistribution, so that when it does become food surplus, you're redistributing it to humans or turning it into animal feed. The whole premise of that is that you're not putting anything in the bin. So the way that I like to look at this is that you turn that upside down, effectively emptying what's in the bin on the floor, and looking at what better decisions could we have made on those products. Because I think that depending on what sort of KPIs you have in retail, you'll be looking at, did they follow the compliance of doing markdowns and tick in the box? Did they donate to charity? Tick in the box. Once it's got past that, you're almost saying, giving yourself a pat on the back to say, well, I did all the things that I'm accountable to do, and got a green light on my KPIs. What I'm saying here is this perpetual improvements on keep emptying out and looking at what's actually in the bin and what could you have done with it. Could it have gone to charity? If charities never pick it up on a Monday because they can't make use of that, then maybe dynamic markdowns need to make a deeper markdown. But it's just about thinking more and more and just keep working at what's in the bin and how else could we have made better profitability or better use of that product.
Yeah, I'm thinking about you now in a store making a right mess at the back, emptying these things. But I think it's a really good point, this idea of continually sort of challenge ourselves. Why has it gone in the bin? And why is it going to be thrown away? Yeah, really good. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts and your takeaways. We'll meet again and do this all again for our next meetings. We've got loads of them coming up through the next 6 months or so. And so really appreciate your time in sharing those ideas and those thoughts. Thanks, Richard.
No problem.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR Retail Loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.